Cooling Gata Room. I'd like to present Cornelius with his talk on mastering the Essential 8 framework with a platform approach. Could you please make him feel welcome?
Thanks everyone for taking the time and joining and listening to the Fortinet team. Now, I was reading the book called Mindset from Dr. Carol Dweck last week, and one of the components she talked about in her book is about the mindset. And in the mindset, she talks about having a fixed mindset or a growth mindset and kind of what it means when we look at that from a business perspective. Now, one of the components she talks about is that when we look at a fixed mindset, it's very similar to the story when we're looking at a prince that used to go and fight one dragon to get that one reward, and that's the end of it. Except in real life, we find that there is a lot of dragons and hydras we have to fight, and sometimes it feels that we're not getting the reward immediately itself. Now, some of the dragons that we are fighting can be sometimes somebody like this. I'm not going to try to pronounce his surname, but Alexander. And there's a bit of fun facts if you look at the photo that was taken there on the left from his webcam. But basically, this guy was, I'm going to say, really caused a headache for more than 9 million people in Australia because he was behind the attack on what's believed, of course, for Medibank. Now, in itself, what he started to do, of course, was focusing on different personas. You kind of go, why is that important with what he did? When you look at the personas, what he did was basically, I'm just going to reset my timer quickly so I don't go over time. So one of the components he did was going and say, hey, you know what? We've got one attack vector, but we know that people change as well and businesses are different. So one of the components he looked at, of course, was from a change perspective is knowing that, hey, a lot of companies are paying for ransom and a lot of companies are not paying for ransomware. So kind of what are the changes and the challenges that we see? If you look at the industry, we've seen the landscape itself went from about $980 million to $1.1 billion in payments, but the amount of companies that's actually paying for ransomware, that went down. Now that's a good thing. But when you look at what the other persona from Gustav Dorr, what he started to do was creating another ransomware group called Sugar Ransomware. This focus was on individuals. So imagine something like, let's say, medical records got exposed. Let's say one of those companies decide, hey, you know what, we can't pay for ransomware, we're not going to do it. He goes, that's okay. I'm going to go and have another backup or another threat modeling that we can follow, and that is going to go off to the individuals and go and say, I've got your data. If you're not going to go and pay me my ransom, then I'm going to release your data into the dark web. So that's kind of the techniques that we see what these guys are following, and then talking about what does that look like. If you're looking at, there's a bunch of people actually helping to fight these dragons or these hydras. If we look at, the alleged Lockbit ransomware mastermind, this is the second person that's been sanctioned from Australia. So again, looking at the changes that we see in the industry, this is a step in the right direction. Now, what I'm going to do during the presentation, I'm going to try to make it a little bit different and just give people an opportunity to ask questions. And I've got 3 bottles, so your water can be more secure when you drink your water. So for somebody that's asking questions, I've got some water bottles just to please feel free to ask questions during the presentation as well. I'll make sure there's space for it. I will be talking about a couple of books. Now, you're of course welcome to take photos, but I would say please reach out to me afterwards. I'm happy to share a PDF version of most of these slides here with everybody that's here and just continue the conversation as well. But one of the recommended books, definitely should be on your list, is on Nicole that wrote about This Is How the Time of the World Ends. A great book to read, except if you want to go and sleep at night. But definitely want to go and have a look at that. And of course, also during the presentation, I normally say this is not a presentation from HQ, it's something that I've created with a focus in Australia. So looking at the evidence, if I present something and you think, hey, I maybe said Russian, I should have said somebody else, just point it out to me. Like, I'm South African, we can take some hard stuff as well and just share ideas as well, right? So it's not going to be always just right or wrong. Love the ideas and then update either my presentation with the information that you can share from that aspect as well. This is the idea that I have. It doesn't mean I'm going to get through all of this. I do apologize if I'm going to run out of time beforehand. But the idea is just to go and talk about the world that we live in today. And the focus of this from a SASA perspective was to say, why do we need something such as ASD8 or Essential 8? Does it make a big difference for organization? What is the complexities when we look at something such as that, and how do we overlay that with other frameworks? What does that look like? Can we say we want to paint done? What is that capability in that? So I want to bring it back to the term that we called VUCA. So that is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So that's very much the world that we live in. Again, especially if we look at, I don't want to use FUD in itself because I think most of you would be tired to talk about just the threats out there, but look at a risk-based approach. What does it mean for my business? What are the challenges and the changes that we see? Is it the same today as what it was last week or last year? Because it's not. It's changing. It is quite dynamic in that nature itself. Even if we look at that from an AI perspective, and of course no presentation is complete with no AI in the conversation, but I would encourage you to have a look at this book called The Coming Wave from Mustafa. And in this book, he talked about the life that we have before AI and the implications after AI. And what he's talking about there, and he creates some real good arguments, was around that the life that we have now is like the canary in the coal mine if we're looking at the implications from AI. So that impact is going to be massive if we look at potentially what the world looks like going forward. There is some arguments that, of course, from a vendor perspective, we've got the upper hand at the moment because we've got a lot of investments for more than 10 years looking at that, showing different models on it. If you're interested to see how Fortinet is using AI, please come and reach out to us. We can share how we're using it, consuming it, and sharing it back to the partners as well. But also looking at the threats, if we say looking at the world from a VUCA perspective, this is Glenn Maiden. He's the threat director for our research, and I spend a lot of time with him. And he also creates a lot of presentations that's out on the internet. So I thought, I'm going to have a bit of fun, and I've just put it in here as well. We had a marketing event, and I had some of the marketing directors from Fortinet in an event last week, and I thought, I'm going to go and try and create from public information and replicate Glenn Maiden in AI, or from a deepfake perspective. Now, I know you guys are not familiar, or you don't necessarily know him, but basically the feedback was, when I'm going to show you the video I played, the whole marketing team looked up and went, we didn't approve this marketing message. How did he say that? And then they found out it was deepfake. But I just want to show you what is possible, and this was trained with just under 5 minutes of video. So it wasn't even going and saying, hey, listen, I need like 3 or 4 hours and doing different voice. It was under 5 minutes of video, and this is what I could do.
My name is Glenn Maiden, Director of Threat Intelligence for FortiGuard Labs Australia and New Zealand. I have some exciting news. We are running a limited promotion to coincide with this event. We know that threat actors are not just targeting us at work, they are targeting us when we work at home as well. As such, for a limited time, you can benefit from a free subscription to our industry-leading threat intelligence for your personal use and also for the personal use of your family members. To access this offer, please click on the link below.
And please don't click on the link below because it's not going to be a good thing. But if you look at that, right, so imagine taking this and putting that on a Zoom call. Like, come on, how believable is that? The eye's moving, the mouth is moving. And I thought, but what if I can put that in a different language? Would that work and would that be believable?
早上好，我是 FortiGuard 实验室澳大利亚和新西兰区域威胁情报总监。
Kind of go, that's okay. I can go and talk a different audience as well with the same message. So it's really complex and it becomes real difficult if we look at the world from a VUCA perspective. The potential dragons that we're going to have to go and face doesn't mean that we are fragile. And if we are, what does it mean for our businesses? Now, I think what we need to do from that aspect is moving to the capability to say, yes, we are fragile, but can we move our businesses to more being anti-fragile? And the conversation and the question then is, can we use something such as AUSCERT that can actually help us on the journey? So the whole purpose here is, if you're not familiar with this author, again, some great books. He's got more than just this. He's got an incredible mind. But he talked about, he's the first author on the Black Swan, talking about those things, and he also is the author of Anti-Fragile. And in Anti-Fragile, he kind of uses the idea from, I've got a 3-year-old kid, and am I going to leave my kid to run around with a glass of water, playing in the, on the jumping castle as an example, right? Of course not, because this is going to be fragile. She's going to drop it, it's going to break, and it's not going to be fun, right? But being anti-fragile doesn't mean I'm not going to give her water. I'm not going to give her a glass of water. I'm not going to try to protect everything. It's just going to say, hey, I'm going to give you a plastic cup to run around with. So if you drop it, hey, it's just a bit of water that's spilled. It's not the end of the world. We should take that same concept to businesses to go and say, hey, I'm not going to protect you 100% of the time. What we can do is looking at a framework, for instance, and say, can I protect you 75% of the time? Now, businesses are going through different stages in their life as well. Maybe today they've got a risk appetite for 75%. Maybe next year it will be 85%. So again, bringing it back to those outcomes from a business perspective is going to be quite important. Now, within that, we want to say then, can we define, like almost the conversation I had with this was with the professor at South Australia University. And the conversation, Mamelo, I'll share his details as well. My question in the beginning with sharing this with him from a strategic perspective was, what is the starting point? We need to have a starting point, right? It's going to be my essential aid. It's, that's my objective. And he kind of go and say, Cornelius, that's good, but that's not the starting point. The starting point should be going to find what is the culture that you have in your business? How do we create security awareness in the business? Create that growth mindset then into then looking at the strategy. So your culture defines your strategy that you have. That can bring the alignment with what you have from that outcome that you can then bring to the execution with what you want, and that can be your starting point. So that's more again from how do you build your strategy with a better execution in mind. So what I wanted to do, because I knew I might be running out of time here, is to say, this is what I normally end off with. But today I thought I'm just going to bring it up first, so that after this you're welcome to go and have some coffee. But please do stay, because it's nice not to talk to an empty room. Now, what I've created is in Power BI. Now, again, I'm going to say this is shared in confidence. What it means is something that I've created with a team. So it's not just myself, but it's Australia. It's a project that's kind of go off the side. I actually have other vendors actually helping me with this project as well. It's actually not just Fortinet. But the whole idea here is to say, what can we do in the industry from vendors and just give something back? How do we build maturity or how do we help them to look at the controls that's easy to talk about, but difficult sometimes to look at? So this is the idea. Again, please come and connect with me and I can share the Power BI file with you afterwards. I do have one of Fortinet partners that's looking to build this into an application that's easier to use. We've got, where's the doc? He's with us. There we go. We've got our field CTO here as well. He's been helping in creating questions that you can help to identify your maturity level. And based on that will be better outcomes as well that can help you with identifying, am I level 1, am I level 2? What does that look like? So an example of what it looks like is to go and say, let's map something out such as Essential 8. But then also look at what is the potential levels that we're talking about. So from that aspect, I can look at, hey, let's look at patch applications. I've got my level 1, 2, and 3 on my maturity levels. But then look at best practice. Now, the best practice idea there is not just Fortinet itself, is why should we have that? Why is it important for your business? And then what I've done was looking at products itself and mapping that back into the why. Now, the idea with this was just to say, how do we simplify the messages, or if you need to do your assessment, just to have something, and you might have, hey, I've got this product, why do I have it? Put that into your audit requirements. Help you with the documentation. So it's, again, just to help you with a little bit more feedback on that. Now, what we also have is we've got different partners such as RSM that's actually helping, and we're working and developing things with them to go and say, can they help you to do the audit and compliance or the assessments? Please come and reach out and we can share with you exactly what we've been doing with them. And we also have the guys from Mare. I'm not sure if they are here at the moment, but go and speak to them in the booth 6, and they've worked with Fortinet as well to put that into their assessments. So again, a couple of questions as a starting point. I think it's 25 controls or metrics, and again, help you to just move forward from that aspect. I've done the same thing from a governance perspective. I'm still busy with this one from NIST, but also looking for those that's in OT. So I've done 100% of the mappings to just the products, but I'm about 72% complete just to say why it is. So if you're interested in that from an OT perspective, we've done that mapping on that framework. But even if I look at ASD8, there's one thing that's very difficult to do, and that is when we look at insider threats. What is the framework that I can put in place for insider threats? If you have a recommendation or if you have experience on frameworks that really help you with that, please come and speak to me afterwards. I would love to have the conversation and see what you've been using from that aspect. But a great paper to have a look at if you're interested. Again, I can share that from insider threats. But again, look at playbooks that you can create, but also practice that from an insider threat perspective. Why is it difficult? Why am I saying, hey, it's not easy to have a framework in place? There was an example from a consultant that his whole purpose was to go and do an assessment on a customer, look at the vulnerabilities, and he goes, there's some nice vulnerabilities. I need a nice paycheck, maybe a nice little motorbike or whatever in the garage. And he decided to go and extort this company, so he tried to be a hacker and go and say, hey, we find these vulnerabilities, $1.5 million, and we won't release it. So again, he got caught, but it's kind of, how do you protect against that? I've got an order to come and say, hey, we need to have an assessment, and that same person, insider threats. So what we need to do within that, of course, know the threats, but work on your muscle memory. Even if you look at a playbook perspective, and APRA did an assessment as well, I can share the link for you, where they talked about how do they, they've run an audit from, yes, a lot of companies, they do have playbooks in place, but how many times do you actually practice that? So it just comes in from the awareness, how quickly can we run through that? That's going to be quite important. When you look at playbooks, an idea that we have then as well is look at something in a use case, such as Volt Typhoon. Now, I've done different components within this. One of them was, for instance, I need to create more budget from a security aspect. How do we motivate it? I might go and say, hey, I've got ASD8. Yes, I've got these 8 initial controls. Well, 8 strategies, 52 controls. It should be easy, right? Except it's not. So the idea is to create it into a playbook and a use case. What I've done here in the beginning, I'll show you how you can color code it based on ASD8. So in the beginning, I've got it as red, but just map it back into to say, hey, what are the controls we have? What are the controls that's missing? Do a gap analysis. And you can take that back to the business. And it's a business decision to say, where are we? Where do we want to be? This is what it's going to cost. And from that aspect, you can then create your protection level agreement. Before I continue, any questions so far on what I've showed you here? Excellent. So looking at when we present to the boards, this is going to be quite important as well. But 3 things, like they don't necessarily care, which vendor am I using, which controls do I have to a certain extent. It's just 3 things. It is, do we have the right mitigation strategy? Are we prepared for an incident? So I think no longer are we in the conversation from, hey, the world is on fire, it's all about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I think that's gone. It's more about when something happens, what can we do? And the big component then from a SASA perspective is understanding the business risks, because that changes as well. So an example, by looking at the mitigation, yes, you can bring that back to an ASD8 perspective to go and say, can I have a risk-based approach? Looking at the strategies that we want to implement. Are the controls effective or ineffective? How do we bring that back into the strategy? And when we can't, what are the exceptions? So looking at color coding it, this is an example of what you can do. So even if you need to look at the assessor, this is the outcomes that they would focus on from an ASD8 perspective. It's just the controls that you have from a primary perspective, are they effective? When it's not, it might be ineffective or not there yet. Then you want to focus on secondary controls or alternative controls. I want to say there's a but. The idea there is that you don't leave the alternate controls there infinitely. It's not something that you will leave there permanently. Also, the idea is that it should be as good or better than the primary controls. Why did I put this in here as well as an importance? If we look at components such as the OT environment, now I know that there's certain components, if you look at Essential 8, you need to do batching within 24 hours or 48 hours. I've got one of my customers, they've identified an incident within 2 days, which is very quick. And I asked them, how did they do that? They've looked at Essential 8, but they actually do vulnerability scanning on the critical assets every day. So it's not a once a week or every 2 days. They're doing that on a daily basis. But what they have for their OT environment, that they can't patch every 48 hours. They focus on putting a virtual patching solution in place. So in that, when they're looking at the audits and they do the assessments, they put that back into the documentation on why it is. So it's at a time and space. It's not that they're not going to do patching. It's just giving them time because it can impact live if it takes certain systems down from an OT perspective. So you can bring that back then into saying, can we build resilience and what does that look like? So again, this is based on the white paper, but you want to look at risk management. Of course, you can bring in ASD8 from that perspective, looking at the controls for governance. Absolutely. You can see how that is applied to cyberspace. Your ASD, you can bring that back, for instance, into patching. Those things are critical. You can then say, how do we provide security from that aspect? Of course, my confidentiality, integrity, availability account, all of those things we can bring back into that. But you want to bring that back into the controls. Now, again, you can make this yours. You can expand on that and just see what does it look like from an AST8 perspective. And also what you want to do is minimize my risks. That's kind of what it is. Now, there's different components and different arguments around that as well to say, yes, we want to have those things, but why is that important? Even from an Australian perspective, why do we, even myself, I'm going to say sometimes I love and hate that, sorry for ASD, but I do think it's sometimes easy to talk about, but sometimes difficult to implement, but I think we should look at that. So I've looked at 16 reasons why to build resilience. I'm not going to go through all 16 because basically what it is we've got a product called 40 Recon. And in 40 Recon, we basically look at activities from Telegram in the dark web, and we look at what's happening. And we can break that down into ransomware that we see, and we also look at then Australia. So this is based on the research for the last from January to May, when I've pulled the stats on companies in Australia that we know about that's been impacted by ransomware. I'm not talking about breaches or incidents. I'm talking specifically on ransomware. That's more than 30 companies. Looking at 8base, they've been quite busy. Lockbit, of course, we know that they've been quite active as well. We might see a drop from that aspect. And Play, they've been hitting a lot of companies last year as well. If you look at the revenue for these companies, one of these companies was $850,000 a year, small business, up to $75 million companies of revenue a year. So small businesses to large. And that small business of $850,000 were hit by the same ransomware group from the $75 million company. What they have, they've actually got a cost ratio internally because it's ransomware as a service. So they go based on the revenue of a customer, they can give certain discounts for those customers based on the data that they basically steal. Anyway, that's an interesting conversation we can continue to have. But if you look at the AST8 perspective, of course there's 8 controls that you want to bring it into. And there's also the argumentation from, is that the essential connectivities that you have? Now, I had a conversation with Shana. She's the CISO at Mare. She was the previous Assistant Director General for Cyber Defense Capability, and phenomenal leader. Like, if you can hook her up on LinkedIn, just go and spend some time with her. As a real great leader, I'm going to say, in the industry. She did a presentation at another event, and I've asked her if I can grab that slide because I think it was brilliant. And she goes like, yep, sure it is. And this is her slide, so it's not my slide. But she talked about Essential 8 that can be as an addition to what we've seen from the ASD8. So the component there is looking at the threats that we see in your business and how do we apply controls for that. So that can be, for instance, email security, endpoint security. So there's certain components that's not addressed yet in ASD8 that I think it would be great if it could be included in the future as well. Again, information that I can share with you afterwards, please come and connect with me. But if I look at that to say, what are we missing and what should we be adding in the conversations? So what I've done was looking at stats, because I wanted to look at the evidence, right? It's nice to talk about, hey, we're doing this and we're doing that, but it's where's the stats? Where's the evidence? Just show me what it is. And spot the engineer in me there, right? But it's about, what does it look like? So I've looked at the last 6 months within Fortinet and seeing what do we see happening in the connectivity perspective. So the top 3, again, there's more, but the top 3 components from being compromised, it's no surprise. It's still your RDP, still your VPN. That's more than 75 or 78% of connectivity there or compromised. And of course, compromised accounts. Again, it's not that difficult. So I can look at that and I go, can I apply Essential 8 connectivities to that? Absolutely. If we look at protecting your admin credentials, that can help me with my compromised accounts. But we sometimes need more also on how do we protect our other user accounts as well. So an idea, and this was taken from ACSC ransomware profile. Again, you can look at the capabilities. You can map it back to RDP or VPN access, unpatched vulnerabilities, misconfiguration. That's the first step. They then go and, of course, look at the initial access to get into the victim. From that aspect, we want to go and do command and control, Cobalt Strike or Metasploit, looking at those vulnerabilities. I've got a use case here. I'm going to show you how they can do that as well. Of course, get in the environment, lateral movement, try to use accounts, depending on what they want to do, is then looking at either encrypting your file system or try to use living off the land techniques to stay in the environment as long as possible. There's other priorities as well. So looking at your email access, SQL injection, SSH, those things are also quite important. So what you can do from a compensating control, if you look at those things, kind of why do we have that in place? Again, build it in using maturity, but just ask the question, is it going to be sufficient on each control that I implement? What are the compensating controls? So what is my backup for that? I'm busy working on a small, well, it's the next presentation I'm working on. I'm actually looking at identifying what's the cost for a business when you look at the essential 8 or essential connectivities. It's not just to say these are the controls, but what is the cost for my business in implementing it, and what should be a potential timeline on that. I don't have the stats yet, but please connect with me and I can show you and share with you the journey from what it is. And we'll work with other partners as well and seeing how we can accomplish that going forward as well. But the same thing, just going. Is it effective? Is it not effective? On Queensland Government, on their website, that's also talking about that they go and say, hey, yes, it is good, but we need to do something more that's going to be applicable on building maturity within Queensland Gov. So again, all of those things referenceable, looking at what they're saying on how they're using the controls. Again, the engineer in me goes like, hey, it should be fast, it should be like brilliant, world-changing. You know, if we're looking at ESG, it should be using less power consumption, all of those things. It's like, yeah, it's good. Of course, it's good. We love the engineering. But from a SASA perspective, I just care about, do I have the controls in place? And is it effective? It's not necessarily about the speed of the product or solutions in itself, but can I integrate that? It's going to be important. What I've also done on that is, this is in PowerPoint that I've created. Happy to share some of this information with you. But I've looked at the frameworks and then looking at, for instance, at ISM. And what I've done here in strategy sessions over the last 4 years is to go and say, if we look at those controls, just bring it back in as an example in the technical influence and just map it out. So this is what I've done on the Essential 8. Just look at what do you have and then map out. You might have 30, 40, 50 different security vendors. The next question that we see customers are talking about, of course, is the integration, because we're all going through a bit of a budget exercise of just tightening the belt a little bit, right? I think we're all feeling the pinch at the moment. So instead of working with 70 different security vendors, can I bring that 70 just down to maybe 65 this year, and then maybe 55? It's not going from 100% to 1. That's not the intent. It's just reducing it maybe by 20% or 25%. And when you're doing those exercises, it's just looking then at the vendor integration. Can people work well and talk well to each other? And again, bring it back to your business outcomes. From a technical aspect, we're trying to map it back then into the why. So if we are saying, hey, we can help you with a specific section in ISM, how you can do that or how you can do the hardware configuration guides, we actually share the detail in there as well. If we look at the chatter in the dark web form, some of the components we see, of course, we collected on the dark web, Telegram. We have a report that I can share with you just to show you what the chatter is, like who's the groups, that's most active on that. But the one question that for me is a little bit concerning, right, is where do you look at the conversations and what does it look like? So if you look at the 114 vulnerabilities was discussed in the darknet, and what we found is 90 vulnerabilities, so not very far off, it's been discussed on Telegram. So the one question, of course, here, and this was on Fortune, was just going, hey, is that the new dark web? What does that look like? Now, I don't have it in this presentation, but I'm happy to share with you what it looks like, some of the other chatters in what it looks like and what they do, and some of the other programs, how they basically create their own platform that you don't buy anything on the dark web, but they then use bots to connect to the dark web, and they can go and buy and sell things that you don't necessarily would do in a normal life. If we look at the mobile trends, I just want to share this with you as well, to look at why do we have controls in place and the importance on that, and why we should have not a fixed mindset, but a dynamic mindset, is because of the changes. Because it's easy, shall I say, to get involved for new people to say, hey, I want to get involved in malware. So what we see from a threat landscape perspective is, I can get something for as low as $100 for 2 months or $80. So the price for entry is so low that it's not that difficult or that complex for people to get going, if we shall say that. And also I love this component from InfoStealer, which is $250 for a lifetime license. Now, yes, there is the trust. How much would you trust people in the dark web? Different arguments we can have there, of course. But hey, that's what they sell at the moment. You can also talk about new malware. So that is listed from $1,000 to $450, of course, to $2,000. And that changes also if we look at malware as a service. This I thought was brilliant. You can do a 1-week subscription, a 1-month subscription. So it's just subscribing to it as you need. Maybe you're a student, and you just need a weekend job or a holiday job. Hey, I'm not saying that is what happened, but I'm not saying that's what's not happening. You can get a discount as well. Look at that. Student discount, that's funny. We should ask them. Now, one of the components, we've seen this, and this is from a product called 40 Recon. Again, we've seen some of the connectivities from from 0 days actually getting sold on the dark web for sometimes $50,000 or $50,000. Now, we've seen the prices changes. We've seen the prices, for instance, going as quite low to $15,000, and it can go up for 0 days, sometimes to the 900 to close to $1 million, sometimes more, depending on the vulnerability that's been discovered. But this is what's happening right now at the moment from a dark web perspective on 0 days that's been sold. Now, when I initially walked into this life of, hey, let's go and do the research. Now, of course, we are so blinded to what we do and what we focus on, right? So my research was all about, hey, I'm going to look at the dark web, and this is where all the threats and fears are happening. And all of a sudden, that's the world, right? That's where all the 0 days are coming from. And one thing I've realized is that we are blind to our blindness. So I don't always know what I don't see. What does that look like? And I was a little bit taken back when I saw a report from Google. Shane Huntley, if you're not connected to him or follow him on LinkedIn or LinkedIn, is just look at that, because he's a great researcher. This guy's phenomenal in his work. And what they've discovered was that 80% of their vulnerabilities was that from commercial spyware vendors. I probably read this report 3 times in the beginning. I go everything I thought from a threat perspective is now different. And then I went commercial spyware vendors. I heard about that before. And when I heard about that before was in a book. I'm going to show that in the next slide. But if you're looking at that commercial spyware vendors, that's Cyphergate, RCS, Intellexa. You can put that in your Google or private search engine. Let's go and see what these guys are doing. It is a little bit nerve-wracking. And then also Nate Group and some of those guys as well. Now, I first read about that from the work that the Security Lab and the great work that they are doing, focusing on the human element. So what's the impact on human rights from that aspect? And that was talked in the book from Pegasus. Now, the first book that I showed you was This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends. In there, Nicole talks about Pegasus. Now, I spoke to our threat researcher and I went, why is nobody talking about this? Because this is very scary. I wanted to use the other F word. It was very scary. And the conversation was that when you read this book, you understand the complexity why you couldn't just talk about it. So this was written by a journalist, and it really, people's lives were really impacted from that. So real big impact on that. And they talk about the implications from spyware. Now, some of that we do see as well is executive order from the US saying, hey, listen, we need to go and have a look at how we're using that. And we'll also see France and the UK are bringing more greater regulation when we look at spyware. So those things are key things to look at. But then I saw this and I thought, hey, this is great. Of course, Europol, they've got data. When Lockbit got taken down, they go hey, don't worry about it. We've got some keys that we can share with you. So you don't have to pay for it. You can just go to No More Ransom. And I went hey, that's brilliant. I'm going to go and look for the keys. They've got more than, I think it was 170 groups there that you can go and try and find some of the keys. And then every now and then I go back and I go, I don't know if the site is always operational. And then I remind myself, I need to have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. The information is there, but again, I need to have other controls in place. Don't rely on somebody else to just go and share the keys with you. So what you need to do from that aspect is just looking at creating playbooks. So looking at those capabilities, can I create playbooks on AST8, looking at the threat landscape, of course, and how do you build that into metrics? Great team from Science, they're in the front booth as well. They've got some great information on building playbooks that you can use. And also cyber.org.au. I had a customer that was in the beginning start of their building maturity model. And they just went and said, Cornelius, can you just share a playbook perhaps? And we do that, right? So within Fortinet, we can actually help you to build a playbook. So it's not just technology. We can help you to create tabletop exercises for you as well. So it's not just a one thing. But looking at those things, it can really help you. And then also what we've done there is bring it back to the controls. I'm not going to go into this detail now, but I can share with you how you can look at the vulnerability scores, bring that into your playbook that can help you to create a outcome-driven metric from that aspect. I know I'm not going to have enough time to go through all of this now, but I would love to speak to you afterwards and share ideas of how you can do that based on research and different reports that we've seen available in the industry that's good to have a look at. So of course, what we need to have is a plan. It's not a strategy. More than just a plan. I would encourage you to have a look at no, the name went off now, Roger Martin. He did some great work on just saying we need more than just a plan and a strategy. And actually wrote it down. He said, like, planning is of limited value without a strategy. And he said that there is no conflict between strategy and planning, but effective strategy needs thorough planning. And he goes into detail on how you can do that. So again, I would just encourage you to have a look at that from that aspect. Now, if you bring it back to frameworks, the question is then, is that a benchmark? Is it a framework? Which one is it? I kind of go, it could be a benchmark. Is it a framework? I lean more towards a framework perspective. And of course, looking at those capabilities, even if you look at the benchmark, just going and say, hey, sometimes we just need common sense. HDAT is a great start, but sometimes we just need to look at those security 101 components. But again, happy to share this information with you on how you can build it in your conversations. There's one white paper that I found in Australia that actually talks about ASD8 and how it maps to other frameworks. Again, please come and speak to me. I can share this information with you. But it's just great to see how Essential 8 is a starting point, and it can help you with your maturity with other frameworks. What I'm busy doing is I've got a workshop. It's about 2.5 hours focusing on how do you build your strategy with the controls using Essential 8. And I go into way more detail on this. So if you're interested in that, we're doing it in all the cities, please come and reach out to me and I can share that information with you and with your team if you need that as well. Now, when we're looking at patching, and I just wanted to I'm not going to go through all 8 of them, right? But this is always a conversation. I'm sure you heard about this in the conference as well. But I had a conversation with the SASA and they talked about, do you patch always the whole time? And I went, I wanted to say no, but I want to say yes. So I kind of go, how do we do that? Because how do we bring that together? Because the question was, if there is a low probability, and it's going to have a massive impact on my business, should I do patching? How important is that? If I look at it as a business risk, really would I want to worry about it? So this one vulnerability on WooCommerce vulnerability. Now, the question was there that if you've got an exploitation of a 0.04 chance of being exploited. Now, we all know we don't have enough skills in the industry. We're all short-staffed and we're all working very hard in the industry. The question is, would you go and raise that as a high risk, high vulnerability? We got to go and take our OT systems down or whatever system down because there's a 0.04 chance of vulnerability? I don't think so. So the one question then is, if you look at Essential 8, is do vulnerability assessment continuously. Go, why is that important? Bring it back to your patching. This is kind of why. Because we can look, for instance, the NVD, they've added a CVS score a little bit later. Fast forward to June, so not that long after, there was a exploit code that's been shared on GitHub. Again, all of this is referenceable. I can share with you where it is, and you can find more information on that. But you fast forward that to just July, and we have 2 minutes left. Excellent. All right. And fast forward that, basically what happens is those things basically got, August was the first exploitation that we have. That got exploited into a very quick time into probability, into Metasploit, and that vulnerability basically ended up being one of the top 1.3% of all CVEs in a very short period of time. So if you look at those capabilities from a patching perspective, you can see the impact that it will have on your business. Now, again, there's one thing I'm going to leave you with, and that is please come and speak to me afterwards. I'm going to share more details on how you can get access to this. And of course, we'd love to have the conversation where we can share more about credentials compromise. How do you do that? And how do you build ASD, or how you can use the Essential 8 and build it into a strategy within your business. I'm Cornelius Mare. I'm the sales for Fortinet Australia. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate everybody being here as well. Thank you. Before I run off, just one or two questions maybe, if that's okay. One question. So the next question is, who would like to have a water bottle? If somebody, because you're in the front there, it's just going to be easy because my time is up. Guys, listen, thank you very much. If you're from the education perspective for universities, we've got books that we share for free. I'm going to say value add for schools as well. It's been greatly accepted within the industry, so we encourage you to please have a look at this, even for your kids as well. Again, from Fortinet, guys, thank you so much. Yeah.